Yeah, so I'll start again. My name's Kinlan. I'm a developer advocate at Google. Yeah, and we're going to talk today about making your web applications accessible using JavaScript, HTML, and kind of what we're doing inside the browser to make accessible applications. And one of the things I want to try and highlight today is actually why it's really important to develop applications which are accessible. And not just think about the people who actually need accessibility to actually use the internet, but why it's actually good to develop them for all your users. So we're going to look at this case study, which is the add to circle widget inside Google+. We're going to talk about how we made that accessible, how we can make that kind of widget accessible inside the browser at least. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But yeah, the first thing is accessibility on the web. Accessibility basically means making your web app usable, your website usable by anyone on the web, regardless of whether they can whether they can use a mouse, whether they're not blind or whether they are blind or have some visual impairment. And this includes this basically means taking advantage of tools which like the assistive technologies, whether it's a screen reader or whether it's kind of a special motor like neuron type of device. One of the weird things, and this is really embarrassing. I always wondered why we called accessibility ALI or A11Y. And does anyone know why?
Number of letters between
yes.
A and Y?
Yeah, so it's the number of letters between A and Y. And because accessibility, even in English, is really hard to write, so they call it ALI. We have internationalization, which is, I think it's I18N. Yeah, and I don't know why I didn't make the association between the two, but I was like, why do we call it? And then, oh yeah, kind of makes sense. But if we see people mentioning ALI or A11Y, then we're talking about accessibility and about how to make your apps accessible to users. So, yeah, the target audience of accessibility, this slide is a little bit wrong because it's not about users with assistive technology who need assistive technology. It's about making your applications, the user experience in your application work well across all your, for all your users. But the most important ones are the users who do actually need assistive technology. So blind users, for instance, they will need a screen reader pretty much. Then they might also need a braille output. The whole idea of being able to kind of feel the text that's on the page because you can't see it and maybe you can't actually hear what's being presented to you. We need to make our applications and our websites work using those technologies, and we can actually do that. And then there's things like low vision. I mean, people who aren't completely blind but have relatively poor vision, they need some assistance to be able to make the text bigger. Maybe it's even things like color blindness if you're colorblind and not sensitive to certain colors. We need to be aware of this when we're developing our applications, and so that we can basically make our applications work and let those users use those applications. And then there's things like motor impaired users. These are for people who can't use the mouse or maybe the keyboard as well as as anyone else normally, I suppose. So there are special devices that people can get which enable you to reach those users and those users to use those applications. But we have to be aware of how we develop our applications so that those users can take advantage of it. So I say my team at Google, it's not my team. But essentially we've made an application called ChromeVox, and I'm going to show you a bit about ChromeVox right now. It's a Chrome extension, it's in the Chrome Web Store, and essentially it's a screen reader inside.
Accessible web apps.
There we go, that worked. So it's a screen reader that's built into Chrome, which basically scans the document object model, the DOM, and then speaks out the text. So it's a screen reader in the audio sense of a screen reader. And it does nice little things.
Target audience: users with assistive technology, blind users with a screen reader that describes the page.
And get on for a second. But the idea is that when you move between the pages and maybe the title changes, the screen reader will detect these changes and then present them to the user. So
you control it using keyboard shortcuts. It speaks the contents of the web page using the Chrome text-to-speech API.
Yeah. So actually that's kind of a cool thing. So the same demo that you saw today where Il-Marie spoke into the microphone and it converted the speech into text, well obviously we can do the same thing in reverse and we can turn that text into audio basically. So what we've done is we've basically hooked up with those APIs. We're able to interact with the DOM because it's a Chrome extension, and the Chrome extension can get access to any data in that page. So we built this screen reader which uses those two APIs. It's kind of cool because there are little things that
List with 2 items, list with 2 items. It speaks the contents of a web page using the Chrome text-to-speech API, list item.
Okay, cool. So actually what it's doing is it's reflecting across the DOM, and the user who needs this assistive technology can...
You control it using keyboard shortcuts, list item.
So we can actually control the area of text that the user is looking at, and then spit that out so the user can actually go through each sentence and each paragraph individually and have that spoke to them. I'm just going to turn it off because otherwise we'll just have text to audio for the whole presentation. Let's see if this works now. Cool. Actually, I do need it on actually. I'm going to turn it back on.
Accessible web apps.
So we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do to demonstrate actually why this is important. The first generally is input, right? So we have all these rich HTML elements, basic elements like
Enter your name, edit text.
there we are. So
Enter your name, Pa, editable text, U-L, Paul, K-O-N-L-A-A-N-L, deleted, Oi, deleted, in, La, N.
so this kind of highlights some of the problems that we face today and why we actually need to build applications which are a lot better than they are today. But the idea is that we have all these form elements.
Enter your name, Paul Kinlan, edit text.
Which have some semantic meaning, and because they have a semantic meaning and maybe some data attached to them, we can tell the browser actually what to say, at what point to say it, and how to say it to the user. So this
Choose your favorite color, red, list box 1 of 10.
There we are, and then we can select the items so we can move through them and it'll say blue.
Blue 5 of 10.
So it's basically, this is kind of what users who have a visual impairment and need to use a screen reader face on the web today, right? And this is exactly how they use their applications. So I'll just mute it for a second. I'll go to the next page. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the building blocks, how to build applications which are accessible. And then we're going to talk about how to create custom controls, which is the kind of the case study for the circle widget. The idea is basically HTML elements are relatively complex. We have some basic elements like input boxes, select boxes. Yes?
Just a small question. If it works with other than English languages.
This actually should, as long as we have the text-to-speech synthesis in another language, it should actually work. I've not actually tried it for any other language other than English. We can find out, definitely. Yeah, cool. So that was actually whether this actually works in other languages. I believe it does, but we need to find out more. Yeah, so the next steps are building actually like relatively complex controls. The idea is that we have a basic set of HTML elements which we can use and which have a semantic meaning, which are good. But then you do a date picker or a calendar entry or maybe some kind of complex like Gmail kind of email provider. Those controls are relatively more complex. They're not in the kind of standard HTML5 toolset. But we need to make those accessible because by themselves they're not. And we're going to talk about how to do that at least. And then we've got some tools and resources, which I'm going to try and give you some links to at least. So yeah, the building blocks, right? So start from scratch. The most important thing that we need to do is actually have a nice, simple, plain DOM. And this is making sure that we don't have to kind of use tables for images. Like in the olden days I say the olden days, like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we wanted images to load quickly, we'd splice the image into like a 3x3 grid, and then have a table, and then each cell had its own image so that it could load different parts of the image like dynamically. We just need to get away from that kind of construction mechanism. So we're building applications. We use a table to represent tabular data. We don't use it for styling and all this type of stuff. If we start using elements like they're not meant to be used, for screen readers, it's going to be impossible for them to be able to understand that content that's on the screen. We need to make our applications, work with keyboard. And the really interesting thing about the keyboard work is actually it helps users who maybe have an impairment around kind of types of devices that they can use for input. But generally, for users on the web who don't want to use their mouse because it's a context switch, basically you have to take your mind off the fact that you're using the keyboard and move to another device. We need to build our applications so they work with keyboards basically, and this helps everyone, not just kind of plain, not just normal the users with an impairment. So, yeah. So you say here the DOM is this user's mental image. The idea is it's a document from top to bottom You should be able to view it and kind of understand it plain. So if there's no styling, kind of no images and no kind of extra kind of fluff around it, you should be able to see the site as it's meant to be as a plain document. And what we'll find is that most applications and quite a lot of websites aren't built that way. They're built against the grain of kind of DOM. So they'll use tables for layout. They'll, it's kind of crazy. But what we're trying to say here is start with a simple DOM, and it actually helps you as a developer throughout the whole application lifecycle development. My case in point here is we had a demo. I'll tell you what, I'll see if I can show you. I like to show this to everyone. It's a nice demo. So we built a news reading application at Google I/O, and it's kind of interesting because the user interface itself, it looks kind of dynamic. It doesn't look like it fits in the normal flow. It looks like this piece of text here is maybe somewhere else inside the document. But actually, if you look at the, go to the HTML here and view the element, we'll actually see that we're using articles, headers, summary, and actually basically we should have the full text somewhere as well, the section, and then the footer. So we actually have all this information, even though it's positioned in completely different parts of the screen, makes it feel like it's in, not in normal flow. Actually, the DOM itself is in top to bottom order. So this article at the top, Web Intents a Fresh Look, with a heading and a summary, and then all the full text here. Even though it's completely separate on the screen, it is actually in line inside the DOM. And the point I'm trying to make actually is that this is really important for you as a developer and for all your existing users, not just the users who have to use assistive technology such as screen readers. So yeah, best practices. Use headers, navs. If you have a navigation section, use the nav element. If you have a section which is a header of, say, an article with some extra information other than the H1, maybe the time of publication, use the header element. Use sections and footers. Use the proper, correct semantic elements, which screen readers can take advantage of now, to actually give that indication to those type of technologies about how to actually explain what's happening on the screen to the user. The other one here is make sure that the controls are grouped together in the DOM. The demo that we had here, although, like I said, although they don't look like they're inside the DOM, it's in a natural order. So header, summary, section, main body, and then footer. And that goes on for each article, right? And that's the really important thing, is because a screen reader can only go from top to bottom. It can't kind of randomly jump around the document object model to try and understand what's happening. It needs to go from top to bottom. And using that kind of methodology to build your apps and your sites will help you as a developer just generally anyway, but it will also help your users who need assistive technology. Yeah, and the big thing is use CSS for layout rather than tables. I think, although a lot of existing applications and websites don't do that, I think they're looking at now with the advancements in CSS3 and Flexbox model, we don't need to use anything other than plain divs, sections, and articles to have some nice positioning. Yeah, so this is the example, right? The case that they're trying to highlight here is, it says the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain, which actually when you look at that, we can read that and understand that. But what we're trying to say is, actually this isn't the physical representation of what it looks like in the DOM. This is it here. And if your physical representation in the DOM doesn't look like it does to a normal kind of non-impaired user, then the screen reader is not going to be able to decipher actually what happens. It doesn't know that a CSS position for a span, actually what that means. It has no idea at all what that means. All it can do is read through this. So if you're developing things, make sure that they're logical flow, they're in line, and it's in document order. That's the biggest kind of example. Interactive controls. This is kind of crazy, right? There was a kind of a stage a little while ago where people would develop a button. They would make a button element that you'd click, and it would be a div. And it wouldn't be a button, right? And it was a common thing, people would do that because in some of the older browsers, it was kind of hard to style the button element because the button element was a native control. I mean, when I say native control, it was a control that was, maybe it was like a Windows button and they would place it on the screen, but it would actually be the C++ button code that would render that, not the pure HTML. And one of the things that we've moved to in kind of most recent browsers is actually saying every element that is on the screen that you see inside the browser is rendered, it can be rendered and manipulated via CSS and JavaScript essentially. But before we got to that stage, people were doing this. literally they'd have a div which had a JavaScript click event, and then you'd press the button, and it would do the code that a normal button would do. And the problem with this, excuse me, the problem with this is that screen readers don't understand that that div is supposed to be a button, and this user is supposed to click on it. If the element itself is a button, then that's a call to action for the screen reader to say, you might actually want to do something with this because it's going to perform an action. And it's the same with links as well. So people started moving away from links because we couldn't style them as well as we could with spans. We just need to completely remove away from that. If you have a link which takes you from one place to another, or performs some kind of in-page action, which is potentially bookmarkable, just use a link all the time. If it's a button, if it's going to do an action, whether it's post to a server or an AJAX request, just use a button. Don't use a div with any extra technology, like any of this extra fluff around the DOM. Yeah, this is kind of what we're saying before. There's no reason not to do this now. Maybe in the past with some of the older browsers where they used the native controls, we couldn't style up a button to make it look like a nice blue thing and all this type of stuff. But we can now. And then there's a piece at the end here which says about focus management and keyboard support. You have to build applications to be able to be responsive to keyboard input, and we're going to show you how to do that today. So this is the example. This is an example of a button, right? I'm going to show you two examples now. I'm going to quickly flick between them. They look exactly the same. But the problem is that this is a button. Should we just try and... No, I won't turn it on. This is a button. It does the thing. It says send. It's not the greatest piece of code. But there is absolutely no semantic meaning to this at all. We go to this one. This has the button. It's styled exactly the same. It uses the exact same CSS styles. Tell you what, if we... Whoa. That's not what I wanted to do. Spec element. If we just jump into the dev console, and then we go to this button here. We can see we can style this up. We can have... Can you see that at all? The bottom there. We've got like nice linear gradients on the background. It looks kind of cool. We have complete flexibility over how we design that button to look and feel, but it is a semantic button. It is just the plain standard button. I need to remember how to get out of that. Yeah. There we are. I mean, it's hard to say exactly why that's important. In fact, that it's very important, and it's the semantic meaning which is the really key part of this. There we go. Just jump back. Label your controls, right? So, how many people know about the label element? There's a couple. It's actually a good number, right? So, I'm preaching to the choir here. It's so obvious, but the idea is that still a whole load of developers will use like a p tag, just to describe. They'll put a p tag with some text and then the input element at the end, and we just can't do that because there's no association between that p tag and the button itself or the input element. So just use the label, first name. It's for the first name. This is the element with that ID. It just helps screen readers so much, and it's like the alt element on the image tag. We tend not to do it because it's easy to ignore and we just don't care about it. But if you need a screen reader to use your site when you see an image, the first, and I'll show you it in a minute when I turn it on. But the first thing that the screen reader will do is just say image. It doesn't know what the image does. It can't describe the image. It doesn't know how to tell the user what that image means. So at least put an alt tag. It takes 2 seconds to do. Put an alt tag actually on all your images. If it's a decorative image and you don't have any, it doesn't have any meaning, you can not leave it out, but alt equals blank, and that should cause the screen readers to not actually even say it's an image. So let's do this. This is an example, right? Hopefully this will work. Cool. So
Edit text.
So it said edit text, right? It's kind of interesting. It's like
901D3N94T for image P, editable text, L.
So actually what it's done there is it said that image. It's to talk about that image there, which is this thing here. It means absolutely nothing to anyone who needs a screen reader at all. We'll put the pin number.
Password, edit text, 901D3N94T for image, editable text, asterisk.
Yeah, it's not very good. Not that good, is it, right?
Labeling, correct example, bridge secured.
Okay, so this is the proper example, right? This is what we want to try and do. If you actually look at the code, there really is not that much difference between the two, apart from we're using the correct semantic tag. So we're basically making sure that we use a label rather than a p tag. It looks exactly the same, So for the end user presentation, it's exactly the same. There's really not that much difference, but it has a proper semantic meaning. So if we do this correctly,
Username, edit text.
there we are. It knows it's a username because the label is saying this label that says username is for this input element. And that's all
Username, edit text. Username P, editable text. O, L.
Yeah, okay. It's kind of cool. So I'm actually not sure what happened when we do the base security, bridge security images.
Accessible web apps.
That's not right out.
Username, edit text.
Yeah, we'll leave that. Doesn't matter too much. But the whole idea behind this is that the key kind of important pieces, at least, is just make sure that, I'm going to say this all the time for this presentation, is use the correct semantic tags. And this is the highlight, this is the example. It's pretty much the exact same amount of code that you have to do, but it's just basically using the correct semantic tag. Managing keyboard focus, this is really important, and we forget about this when we're using mice to actually manage our navigation around the app. But when you can't use a mouse, you have to rely solely on the keyboard. An application that doesn't manage the focus correctly is frustrating. It's almost useless for the user, right? So one of the things that we can do is if you've got an explicit user flow, maybe for form entry, you can specify things like tab index to say this is the first element, second element, third element. But if you have a relatively complex user flow, there's a piece of JavaScript you can use. It's element.focus, which allows you to actually tell the browser where to move the focus of the focus of the element, or the focus maybe of the input kind of text, or whether it's to a button. But what happens when you change the focus is that the screen reader knows the focus has changed, and it will actually read out that piece of text essentially, which is there. So if you say, well, I'm going to enter my first name, surname, and then the next button is the piece of the element that the user should click. You basically say submit button dot focus this piece of code, and then the browser will say, well, actually we know that the next action really should be press the next button. It will read out the fact that the user should then press that button. And it's really important as well because we're starting to build kind of Ajax but we've been building kind of Ajax applications for a long time now. And they have their own way of managing modal dialogues and kind of pop-ups and the presentation to the user. What we need to do is when we're building kind of for the keyboard input is when the user, for instance, closes that element, we focus the element, we give the focus back to the browser to the element that caused the action. So if you say, well, you've seen this a lot, right? You'll have a sign up screen for like a web service, and then you press login, and then an Ajax kind of div pops up, then you enter the username, press submit. So what actually should happen once you've registered and you've submitted the data is you should direct the user back to the element that caused the action. So they click the sign in button, you basically tell them to, you basically direct the user back to that sign in button. And it's one of those, it's just a little thing, right? So this is an example, right? Right, let me just get the screen. So we do this, and then we press OK. The first thing about this to note about this is we press this. Actually, for a screen reader, it doesn't know where the focus should be. It doesn't know the fact that OK is probably the thing that you want to do. You want to buy something, you'll press OK and buy it. So the screen reader has no idea that actually what's happening there because is the important thing, because all you're doing is you've got a div that is hidden, then you display that div, and then you ask the user to do something. A user who's not visually impaired will just go, OK, and press the OK button and know what to do. It's kind of weird, but that's actually what happens. What we need
Pop-up
to do.
dialog, correct exit.
I'll just close that for a second. For instance, here is we're going to press the button. This is the action that we want the user to do, so we turn it on. Again, we just cancel.
Buy more printer ink button, exiting dialog. Dialog, OK button, entering dialog.
So basically what we've done is we've told the screen reader that the core piece of focus that the core element that the user should focus on to actually perform this action. And also because we focused it, we can actually do some nice styling as well, so that we can, if you're kind of not completely blind, but you have some kind of low visual acuity, you can at least see that this is where you should be focusing your action.
Buy more printer ink button, exiting dialog.
And then what we've done is we've successfully done that action. We send the user directly back to the same point that they started. And that's what we encourage everyone to do at the moment. And if you look at the code between the two, we're going to jump between them. This is the easy code, right? This is like 6 lines of JavaScript or 8 lines of JavaScript and some HTML. I actually won't lie about this. It's a little bit more complex when you have to manage the focus. But it's actually improving the user experience, because if I was doing this, I could, in theory, press enter. Well, I did actually then. I could press enter because the focus has been given to that button element, which means I can just not have to actually take my hands off the keyboard and do that work. So for me as a,
Yeah, how does it know it's a dialogue? Is it just because the class?
So this is it. So we're going to talk about arias in a little bit, but you can do things like have arias to describe the role that says it's a special type of dialogue.
Right, because in the previous screen, there's nothing written. No, it's just class dialogue.
Yeah. Actually, if you look at this as well, there's actually nothing. There shouldn't be the aria on this. Oh no, there is.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about this in a little bit actually. Because the code gets a little bit more complex. We know it's a dialogue because we're telling. This one, question back.
I have just a question about the dialog. When you display the dialog, the user basically doesn't know anything else. It would be maybe more useful read the text in the dialog.
Yeah, actually, I believe that's a bug at the moment. It should actually read the text inside that dialog. Because this is it. It's a call to action. You want to know what you're supposed to do, and then it should actually. That's okay.
And it's managed by the screen reader, or you as a developer have to say, like, this is the text I want user to read?
No, it should be managed by the screen reader. It should be managed by the screen reader. And as long as the screen reader can respect the role, and it knows it's a dialogue and it should read it, it's dependent on the screen reader how it does it. But what we've essentially done in this one is we focused the element to be the buy button, and it's read out that over what it should have read. But the code's a little bit more complex. This isn't code for the screen reader. This is code to manage the user flow. And like I was saying, it helps all the users, regardless of whether they have an impairment and have to use the keyboard by choice or by force, basically. But this is it. All we're doing is we're moving the focus element. So we take the element and select focus. It's not an amazing amount of code, but you have to do things like manage state. Here we go here. In this case here, we're managing the target item that has the last piece of focus. And to be honest, this is just crying out for a library to be able to do it automatically, so that you don't even have to think about which element has the focus and how to build these accessible applications. But unfortunately, this is what you have to do at the moment. So this is it. So navigation shortcuts, it is possible to kind of shortcut code based off keys and all this type of stuff. If you're doing that, you definitely need to be able to describe to the user the documentation around the shortcut keys, because it's not eminently discoverable. And group sections and group UI to logical units, this kind of makes sense because this is what we want to do anyway. If you're building a nice user experience, regardless of whether you have to use a screen reader, you want the user interface to be kind of in logical units and the flow to go from entry, confirmation, and then submission, those type of things. Action shortcuts, they do simplify the workflow, but the problem is that you have to document it somehow. But it can really help all users, not just kind of the users in the screen readers. So we've talked briefly, it's very briefly actually, about kind of the basic HTML5 elements that use semantic DOM, but use an element like for data input, email input. We have those HTML elements which can help the screen readers. But if you either maintain legacy code or you want to basically build a complex control, you might still have to do this div soup, this whole idea of a div inside a div and then style everything up based off classes. So we're going to talk about how we can actually use arias and focus management and keyboard support to build those complex controls. So this is the idea at least. So we've got this div, which if you use Google+, it kind of looks like this. It's a complex widget. There's actually 2 sections to it. There's the button, which, and for all I've said before about we should use the button rather than this, we're just having to assume maybe we've got some legacy code which hasn't got a button element but uses a div, and we have to deal with that. We're going to have to try and kind of manage around that, and that's what we're going to try and show you in a minute. So we've got this kind of button widget here, and then we've also got the main kind of circling kind of widget, which if you look here, there's absolutely nothing semantic about this. The number 1 is not in the same order as friends, because you'd read that as friends, well, one person in my friends group, family, 2 people in my family circle. If you look at this element here, the screen reader tried to read that, you'd have no idea what to do at all, because it's not semantic and it's not actually in order. So the first thing we're going to do is manage basic focus, tab index. It's been actually in browsers for years. Just kind of manage the order of when you press tab, where the focus goes to next. If you want to have your item focusable, but not actually in tab order. Just specify tab index equals -1. And again, I mean, what you'll find is this is okay for very basic forms, but if you have something which has got some relatively complex flow, and it's inside like an Ajax, I keep saying Ajax, right? But it's in something where you might have multiple calls to a server and then respond in the user interface in the same screen, but in different ways. You'll need to have your own JavaScript to manage the user flow, and you can do that just with the element focus. And I'd encourage you to do that generally. Keyboards. This is the thing. If you've got a button, a div which accepts a click because you've got the on click, because it's not a proper control which the browser knows can be pressed because it has no idea at all. You need to kind of at least manage on key down. That's the very basic thing that you should do. And again, this is calling out for a big library to kind of manage this, and I think there's a couple coming out soon. But the whole idea is that anything that you do based off a click, you should at least be able to do and handle inside a normal on key down or on key up, depending on which way you want to do it. And this is the code, enter a space. It's relatively simple, but again, it's one of those things, it is actually a little bit more work for you to do. But if you are building applications which use divs, you need to do it, otherwise your application will not be able to be used by anyone who can rely on a keyboard. Again, the add circles widget. We've actually just talked about this. But basically what we're saying here is that we've put the tab index, which means it's focusable at least, which means that you can tab to it. If you don't have the tab index equals 0, if you press the tab button, if you don't have it, you press tab, it'll never be focusable. At least if you have the tab index, it will be focusable at least. But then you still have to have that event to manage the key press as well, because otherwise the browser's not going to know what to do because it's not a semantic type. Again, here we go. Once you press the button, the first thing that you want to do is actually focus the user's next set of key presses to this kind of list. The worst thing that you could do is the user will press enter or press space. It'll pop up this list, and then they've got no way of actually getting to those elements. So you can do the same thing. You can have the outer div for each of these, the tab index if you want. But then you have to just basically set the focus yourself. And that's what we're saying about managing the focus and the keyboard focus and all this type of stuff, is that because this is an element which the browser has no knowledge of any semantic meaning, it won't know what to do with the data. So you need to actually tell it to focus it on the first element, which you could then maybe then provide the up-down keys to be able to go through that list. We can add arias for screen readers. Arias are those, they're essentially roles to describe sets of tags which have no kind of current semantic meaning. And we saw that from the button before. I'll jump back a little bit actually. We saw this earlier on where we actually, this is the aria. We basically said this div element here is a dialog box. It's not a dialog box in any kind of HTML sense, apart from we're trying to give the screen readers and those assistive technologies some indication about what this piece of HTML will do. So I'll just jump back a little bit. Sorry about this, go jump in between them. That's kind of the basic thing. That's how we've used it in our application at least. So the first thing we do, at least, we need to tell a screen reader that a div that you've styled up is a button. It's pretty simple. You just say it's a button. And that will at least give some indication to screen readers that there is an action that's going to be, potentially an action that's going to be performed down there. It won't do the kind of the handle the key presses and all those type of things. That's not for the screen reader's job to kind of manipulate, and make that feel like a button. That's for you to actually fix, but the screen reader will at least know that it's a button, and you can present it to the user in that way. And likewise, if you've got a menu item, before the menu tag came along, you'd never actually really know anything, at the top of it, this kind of weird div soup is a menu. But you can at least say certain items are menu items, which means that if the screen reader is intelligent enough to be able to parse menus separately, then it knows exactly that this piece of text is something that might perform an action. And then there's this idea of a landmark role. These themselves generally are about saying this one div will contain no other block elements. It's not a big widget, it's just a button basically. A landmark role is about grouping a whole section of other kind of buttons and other kind of roles into one nice friendly package. So the idea is that you might have actually a dialog. This is a good example. We're using search here, but dialog is a landmark role because what it's saying is everything inside this element might be another complex widget with other items and attributes or other HTML elements which will have other kind of roles on. It's not amazingly important to kind of worry about at the moment. The most important ones are, the basic buttons and menu items and other things as well. Arias as well, they have state. So you can describe an element like a div as a checkbox, for instance. It's not actually physically a checkbox. It just isn't in any form of HTML. But if you've been forced to develop your own HBox widget or kind of button control, you can at least tell the screen reader that this div element is a checkbox, for instance. And then you can tell it the state of that, because if you create a div with a little tick button because it changed the background image, the screen reader is never going to know that actually the user has selected that element. They might be able to kind of look into the on-click and all this type of stuff, but it has no understanding that that element is checked. So you can at least say that this is a checkbox, and it's checked true or false, basically. If you're a site like Twitter, where you've got like a constant stream of data coming down, you can specify a role, or a property at least, sorry, not a role, of ARIA live. And that's just to indicate to the screen reader at least that this piece of content that is contained inside this div or this block element essentially is live. It keeps getting updated. But then you can specify things like, how important it is to your application that the screen reader should keep reading out the content. So for instance, if you're Twitter, you might say, well actually, ARIA Live is a really high priority area because we want to tell the user of every brand new tweet that comes in. But if you don't want to do that, and you want to say it's a slow update, maybe read a summary of all the tweets that come in, you can specify it as a lower level priority area. But then again, it's one of those things, you can tell the screen reader that this like content inside the div is not high priority, but then it's down to the screen reader to actually decide what to do with that. So this is adding arias at least to the circle widget. So we've added tab support here. We've set it to button because if you look at it there, it's a div, it's not a button, but we've told the screen reader at least it's a button, so that the screen reader can now take advantage of the fact that maybe tell the user to press it rather than just it's a div with some content in. We've told the screen reader that this area here is a dialog, and that each of these elements inside here are checked. So the checkbox itself isn't just this one little box, I believe it's this whole row. But we're at least saying that it's a checkbox, it's a checkbox, and it's false. When we select it to change it to true, you still have to do the manual work. It won't change itself because you'll click this div and it won't know that it's changed its ARIA state at all. So you have to do it yourself. So it's like managing the keyboard focus. If a user responds to this, you update your user interface maybe by changing a class or update the background image and then save it off on the server. But you will also need to actually update the ARIA state. If you don't do that, then they have no way at all of knowing that it's changed. For all intents and purpose, the screen reader will still think it's checked. So kind of we're getting to the end now. So at least keep the DOM structured and sensible. It's hard to say how important this is. I mean, it is really important, not just for kind of screen readers, but you as developers. We don't want to get to this point where you have to develop, you wanted rounded corners inside your application. So you'd have to have a div, like an outer div, and then an inner div, and then like 4 or 5 different divs kind of positioned at different points. We don't want that, right? It's hard for you as a developer normally to manage those type of things. It's even harder for a screen reader to actually be able to parse that data and that information. So just make sure your DOM is structured in a sensible way, reads from top to bottom, all your information is logically grouped together. Make sure you use labels. I mean, we all know about the label tag. Just use it. It's pretty simple. It really helps the screen readers. Focus management. It's one of those things I never ever bother with when I develop applications, but it's actually core and key to what you do, because not only does it help the keyboard, the users who have to use a keyboard because that's the only way that they can interact with applications. It just helps people regardless, right? So if you've got a nice workflow about data entry and data input, just help normal keyboard users rather than people who necessarily think it's about accessibility management. Yes, and include arias. There's a whole piece of documentation inside this presentation which points to the different arias that we can use. We've only touched on button, dialog, and menu item. There's a whole lot of different ones as menus, menu items, buttons, dialog, different types of dialogs, whether it's an alert. There's a whole range of different things that you can do. And just one simple attribute on your HTML5 element can greatly improve the legibility of your application to the screen readers. And if you're building custom controls, just make sure you do kind of all the advice that we've got there. Because if you're building a custom control, there's absolutely no way for the browser to know what that control does. So tools and resources, ChromeVox. ChromeVox is built into Chrome OS itself, but it's actually a Chrome extension. This is the URL. I'll share it later on Twitter if you want to follow me, Paul_Kinlan. I'll share it a little bit later, but the idea is it's open source. We have all the source code available as well. But we can get it, install it, and if you need a basic screen reader, you can at least use this one. It's kind of important for Chrome OS because you can't run external applications on it. Chrome Shades, we talked briefly before about having a proper semantic DOM that reads correctly and having all the content in the correct place. Chrome Shades kind of removes all the styling, so if you need to see what your application looks like to a screen reader, Chrome Shades will actually do that. It's a great way of just kind of doing some basic accessibility testing, just to see what your application on your site looks like without styling. And we've also, it's an open source project, so Google, AXS, chrome.googlecode.com. There's actually a couple of other apps there as well. There are some screen readers, VoiceOver, NVDA as well. Some libraries do help, Dojo, Toolkit, GWT, and jQuery. I still think there's room for a JavaScript client library, which basically will help you manage kind of focus and role support as well. I'm going to try and work on one, but that's no promise at all. There's room for a JavaScript library which handles things like element focus and all that type of stuff, because it's a pain and you shouldn't have to do that in your application. Some final thoughts. Yeah, if you're making from scratch, my thing is try and use the semantic elements. Use a button where possible, like data elements and all that type of stuff. Make sure you do that. If you need to test your application, what if you like to use a keyboard, just don't use your mouse, unplug the mouse. That's the easiest way of doing it, right? And then you'll see how complex some of your applications are to use. And if you have good keyboard management, you tend to get a nice user experience and a nice flow off the back of that. Yeah, and HTML5 standards. Yeah, ARIAs, they're kind of not well known, but some very basic kind of usage of them can really improve your application just for screen readers. Yeah, we have all the code. Before I actually finish, we've actually got an external presenter in. I think we've got time. Yeah, we will start it later, we've got some time. Radek, do you want to come up and talk about what you're working on with regards to accessibility?
Hello everybody, and my name is Radek Pavlíček. I am here from the Czech Republic, so I have one question. Should I speak in Czech or should I speak in English? Is English?
Two questions.
It's two, yeah, sorry. So Czech is better for you, or I have prepared my presentation in English. So
English, please.
English, please. Okay. Thank you very much. At first, I would like to thank you, Paul, and Google for invitation and for a possibility to speak here. I have two ideas, two main information for you. The first is that Google is trying to be more accessible for people with disabilities, and I think that's good, and that's very, very good that also accessibility talk took place here at GDD. And the second one is that Google Chrome is now usable with some common screen readers, such as JAWS or NVDA. So you can use not only Google Chrome for testing, but you can also use some common screen readers and try to simulate the way in which blind people use web pages. This is a short introduction of myself. If you want, you can follow me on Twitter. You can read my blog about accessibility, or you can visit our web page of our project, the Blind Friendly Web, that deals with accessibility. All the information are in Czech. So, as I said, Google is trying to be more accessible, and I really appreciate this effort of Google to offer its services to everyone. There is one service that has been accessible for years. It's Google Search, and a lot of people, handicapped people, really use it and really like it. The second one is Google Chrome and HTML5. It's what Paul has been spoken here just now. The second one is an accessibility survey for blind users. Google cooperated with American Council of the Blind and tries to learn how blind people really use web and how they can improve its services for this target group. So it's very, very good to cooperate with some organization of disabled people. The next point is Android. Mobile with Android can be also used by blind people. There are two screen readers, TalkBack and Spiel, and there are a few blind users in the Czech Republic now that really use a mobile phone with Android as their compensation aid, as their mobile. If you are interested in it, this is a web page of my friend Matěj Ploch, who is testing Android and from the point of view of blind person. So if you are interested in it, or if you have any questions, if you are preparing an application and you want to have it accessible, so you can ask Matěj to test it. Other thing is some big improvement in Google apps such as Gmail, Google Docs, Google Calendar, Google Sites. There were a lot of things that improve the managing the services from the keyboard. As Paul said, it's very, very important. So this can be an inspiration for you. And some local things. Google Czech Republic is our partner in translation, in authorized translation of web content accessibility guidelines into the Czech. And we are preparing some Google user group that will be focused on accessibility. So I think that in a few weeks or a few months it will be possible to discuss these things, although in this manner in a Google user group. Now I have a practical demonstration, short practical demonstration of how to use Google Chrome with such common screen reader. I have here a screen reader JAWS. It's the most popular screen reader around the world, and I will show you how to use it with Chrome to test if your page can be managed or can be used by blind people. So at first I have to launch it. I have a keyboard shortcut for it.
JAWS for Windows is ready. Beta release. H.
So now I have a JAWS and I have Google Chrome with the web page of the Google Developer Day.
F5.
And now I reload the page.
Google Developer Day 2011 Google Chrome. Google Developer Day 2011 visited link graphic.
So the first information that's read is the title of the page, and now I can go through the page. I can read it from the beginning to the end, or there is some better way how to get to the information which I need to know. For example, if I want to read FAQ, so I can take
Links list dialog. Links list view. Google Developer Day 2011 107.
links list from the whole page. The screen reader takes all the links and offers me them in such a list.
Overview, register, agenda, FAQ, enter, FAQ visited link. FAQ visited link. Page has 1 frame, 4 headings and 24 links. Heading level 1 Google Developer Day FAQ. Heading level 3 registration.
And now I got information about number of frames, number of headings, and number of links. And headings are the most important thing that is concerning with orientation around the web page, because it can be used to move quickly to the place where I want to get. So, for example, if I want now read general event questions, it's not necessary to read the whole page, but I can take
heading list dialog. Headings list view. Google Developer Day FAQ.
headings list that has only 4 items. I can take
General event questions :3.
heading general event questions.
Enter Google Developer Day 2011 visited link graphic. Visited link graphic blank.
Sorry, once more, please.
General tab. Move space. General event questions heading level 3.
And now I am on the heading general event questions, and my
Definition list of 6 items.
I can read them. They are organized in a definition list, so I can easily move through it, and I can read it.
Enter Google Develop.
So that was short demonstration how you can use Google Chrome with the common screen reader, and this is the end of my presentation. If you are interested in it, you can ask me. I will be here to the end of the GDD, and I would like ask you, or I would like said that Google has already taken accessibility in mind. There is a lot of things that have to be improved, but if you want, now you can start with accessibility, and if you are creating some web or some application, please have accessibility in your mind and create it in an accessible way. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'll be happy to thank you very much for the presentation. It was good. If you have any questions or feedback or suggestions, feel free to chat them up.
I got two questions. First, about the best practices. If it's better to put the navigation for the page on the top of the page or on the bottom, or it doesn't matter as far as I use menu and article.
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah.
From your experience? Sorry.
I think that it doesn't matter, but the important thing is to say that this is navigation. Using some hidden heading, or you can use landmark from area. There are two possibilities.
How can I hide the heading? Because I have read that when I say display none, some of the readers ignore it.
Yeah, display none or visibility hidden aren't good techniques, because it's hidden also for the screen readers. So you can use the absolute positioning and move the heading some far from the view.
And what kind of heading shall I use? H1, H2, or you can say
for navigation?
Yeah.
It's better to use the headings of our priority, maybe number 4, number 5. Yeah.
What about nav tag in HTML5? Because it's designed especially for saying semantically that this is navigation instead of like this hacks. Does readers know the nav tag or not?
I'm sorry, I don't know because but I can try it. But HTML5 is quite new, and a lot of things for HTML5 aren't supported in the screen readers just now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Me,
Okay.
me, it's personally important to make sure it's a nav tag, and then the screen readers will start taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
I think there's also a role, an area for
Mhm.
navigation as well. So regardless of what you use, you can at least mark it with that as well.
Yeah, that's true. For example, you can use landmarks, and now, and if the screen reader doesn't support landmarks, never mind. But maybe the next version will be, and then it can be useful for its user.
Yep. Your first and then.
Is there any way how can I identify or know that the user is using some accessibility tool, using JavaScript or whatever?
Not off the top of my head. However, there's an object on the window navigator for plugins. Dependent on how the screen reader, I mean, you might have a different answer to this, but depending on how the screen reader, depending on how the screen reader is actually interacting with the browser, you might be able to use that. ChromeVox is a Chrome extension which you can't easily detect. Yeah, it's kind of awkward.
It's very complicated to detect screen readers because people with handicaps use common browsers, and the screen reader is above it.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because things like CSS media queries are supposed to kind of solve some of that, but I don't know many browsers that support it to say that the screen reader is attached to it.
I thought navigation uses Twig or something.
Yeah, and no. And you can use also Flash to detect it, but you can detect only screen readers that use MSAA. But if you have other screen readers, so you are unable to detect it. Yeah.
So we had a question at the back a second ago.
For the whole presentation, I have just two suggestions.
Yep.
Talking about HTML5 and the semantics, we should probably more talk about microformats.
Yep.
And second, we also should mention something like testing or automatic testing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, on the point of microformats, this is one of those things that always depends on whether the screen reader actually supports the microformat.
Yeah, sure.
If it does, it's kind of cool because at least you'll be able to understand the content as well. So you'll understand, even whether it's through screamer.org as well, you'll be able to understand whether it's a person, an event, or a date, and all those types of things.
It's just like
But it's one of those, the thing I would do actually is mention to the ChromeVox, there's a ChromeVox group discussion list, mention it on there because they're really receptive to feedback about how to actually improve the product for users. And if we can say, there's actually a person on this page, do you want to, to the user, then that's actually a really good addition then. So I would definitely raise it there as well. I'll raise it anyway, but if you raise it publicly, it probably gets a bit more weight.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to go?
Okay. You described a few possibilities how to not use on-click and how to use,
Yeah.
and you provided A and button tags.
Mm-hmm.
And how you will describe semantic difference between A and button? When I should use A and when I should button, when I have some dynamic.
Yeah, so that was, the hard part of that was I actually encourage people to always use the correct type. So with the button, there's not an amazing amount of reason why you shouldn't use a proper button because the button can be styled exactly the same way as a div can be styled. It has the kind of the call to action. You can still put the ARIA roles on it as well. My main suggestion is if you have an anchor, use the anchor, don't use the span with an on-click. Don't use a div with an on-click, but we still have to, if you can, and you know that the browsers can support all the styling and all that type of stuff, that's fine. If you have to support an older browser or you've got legacy code which you can't change, then that's when you have to go back using kind of all the advice in the second part of the presentation.
Yeah.
But my advice is use the correct tag.
Yeah, but I'm asking when to use A and when to use button. What is the difference?
Oh, yeah. So I use. I apologize. Sorry. So when to use an anchor or when to use the button.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I always say that the button is like you're trying to submit something to the service or complete an action. You got to remember an anchor as well is only ever a GET request. So I always treat the anchor as pointing to another resource and never performing any modification of any state on the server. So if you have something which would potentially modify state, then it's got to be a button. essentially.
So like deleting some.
Yeah, definitely a button.
A button. Okay.
Yeah, definitely a button. Modifying any state, pushing data to like any complex data to the server, a button. If it's a link, just point to a reference to somewhere else in either a document or another part. That's when you do it that way.
Thanks.
Sorry, I misunderstood the first part of the question. So yes.
Yeah, about the examples in the presentation, it would be interesting part. But first, there was you got 2 input boxes, and below it was description for it, and you use label for labeling it. And you put the input boxes first, and all input boxes, and then the labels.
Yeah.
Isn't it forced for accessibility and then put it in side by side? And
I think what we're trying to highlight there is the fact that you can, with the normal P element, they normally have to position them at the end. And what we're saying is with the label we can do the same, but it's actually hooked to the text box regardless of where it is. Good practice is put the element pretty much exactly where the content is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And there's more about to highlight the fact that we can have it after, but reference directly the input box that the user.
So the best practice is using.
Yeah, I think that's my best practice, and I think that's the best practice everyone else should follow as well.
And also about the example with circles. Why didn't you just use checkboxes and use divs? It doesn't matter.
Again, it's more to highlight. I mean, I don't exactly know what to use on Google Plus, but it's more to highlight the fact that people do have these complex controls which are just written using divs and spans, not using the correct semantic elements. But if you have those type of applications, rather than change them to be the proper HTML element, you can still use things like arias and the keyboard focus, which are relatively smaller impact changes than it is with an input element. The interesting thing, for instance, if you want to get, I think it's IE6, if you want to get to work in an older version of IE, you couldn't style buttons properly. Select boxes, you had no chance of styling the select box and option boxes and all that type of stuff. So that's why people were always forced to use this kind of divs and spans all over the place. So it's more of an indicative example than anything else. Okay. Anything else? Oh, cool.
I have a question about alt description in the image.
Yeah.
Is there any possible way to avoid writing this twice, like in paragraph and in alt, and show alt description of image for non-screen readers, like in common browser?
Yeah.
Using some CSS or something like that?
You can't generally pull them out via CSS.
You can change them to title using JavaScript.
Yeah, that's the way that most people tend to do these things.
Change them to title using JavaScript.
So do you have any advice on
Add title.
No.
There's no title.
Yeah,
So only JavaScript if you want to omit.
yeah, there's no way of actually getting the data out. You might be able to use CSS called like the after selector.
Yeah.
And then you can have content after, and then you can use that content after against some of the attribute values. So you might be able to do that. I've never tried it.
Okay.
But it'd be really interesting to find out whether we can do it. Because you can select like href, so it's like the things where they show you an anchor, which might have some text, but then you want to put like the actual full URL after. And you can select the selector in the content. You can use the attribute basically.
I get the idea.
Yeah, so that might be a way to do it actually.
Okay.
I've never tried it.
Forget about it.
It's a cool trick.
Yeah, give it a go. I mean, that's a really cool thing, right? Give it a go and see what happens. And if it works, then yeah, it's going to be cool.
I'm not really sure whether there isn't a difference between alt tag and the title of the image, because I think that in the title of the image I should say just I don't know, a C or something, and in the alt tag I should describe the image. Or for example, if I have a billboard in the image, I say just in the title Topolánek is vůl, and in the alt tag I have to say a billboard of Czech politician Miroslav Topolánek, where is written or something like this.
I can use description property.
Yeah, you are. Sorry, you are right. The alt tag should be the description of the the picture, and also the alt tag is the thing that is default taken by screen readers to register blind people. So.
It's high priority because it's
Yeah.
the creation of alternative.
Yeah, it's
Like
alternative. Yes.
research, nothing else.
Cool. Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you very much. I was going to say, if you have any feedback as well, I think there's a form that you can submit. I believe someone wins every 300 submissions, they win a prize. I'm not too sure. I might be completely making that up. But yeah, any feedback that you have, we're kind of really keen to kind of just make sure we get this talk better and kind of what you need from accessibility and all that type of stuff. And always just catch me on Twitter or Google+, and we can talk.